Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 248th weekly edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those of you who are watching on video, you'll see that we have a guest. Laura McPhee has joined us, a fan even of our chat, which is, well, that's amazing. That's a good stepping stone into the chat.
Yeah.
Thank you. How are you today, Laura?
Yeah, really well, thank you. Good
Yeah,
morning, Frank, and good morning, Stan.
yeah.
Morning.
Yeah, I reached out to Laura. I think it was me that reached out a few months ago. Well, yeah, quite a few months ago, and I was delighted to find a slot for Laura to join us. So we'll get on to what Laura's about and what she's done and where she is at the moment. But we'll always go to Stan to get a health check and a sense of well-being from Stan. How are you today, Stan?
I feel as though because you've reached a milestone of age now, we're counting days off for me to see if I can survive
How
it
many
till
more days to go, Stan, till
I
you reach
don't
that
know.
milestone?
4 months, 5 months.
Yeah, all right. Yeah,
Before
but
that
everything all
counts.
right at your end?
Yeah, we're heavily involved with the NHS at the moment as
Oh,
an
yeah.
extended family, but yeah, we're all
Brilliant.
reasonably fit.
Brilliant. Okay, Laura. Well, who is Laura McPhee? What have you
Wow,
been
that's
doing? Where do you live? What's your career been like? All this sort of stuff. Over to you.
that's a that's an existential question to start with, Frank. I'll start by saying I'm a proud South Londoner,
All right.
um, but mixed heritage. So I actually am half Bengali, half Irish, and my day job is I'm director of education at University Schools Trust, so a small but growing trust based in East London. But I wear lots of different hats, like lots of school leaders. So I'm also a facilitator for the MPQH on behalf of London South Teaching School Hub. I'm really passionate about school improvement, as you might expect, but in particular, I suppose you would describe it as being passionate about helping others uncover what their superpower is. I think we've all got them. So I'm also part of the Better Futures team for London South Learning Partnership as well. I really love guest lecturing, and for me, that's genuinely about learning from others as well. And I really
I get
love,
nervous at that. I never used to get nervous, but I've got increasingly nervous about that sort of work.
I think I'm the other way around. I
Yeah.
started off really,
I
really
was like you.
nervous. Yeah. And then I think I sort of reframed it. And as soon as I got more comfortable with the idea that actually I am going to get as much out of this as the people
Yeah.
listening, then that sort of settled me down, and just sort of helped me reframe it, I suppose. Love writing and thinking about range of topics to do with education. So lots of blogging. First book was I had the real privilege of co-authoring a book around tackling poverty and
Yeah, I
disadvantage in
noticed that.
schools.
Just that's
Um,
called Tackling Poverty and Disadvantage in Schools, isn't it? Who did you write that with?
yeah. Katrina Morley, superstar, and Sean Harris. So they're both based in the Northeast, actually.
Right.
Um,
Have they
and I guess,
authored before? Have they written before? Were you sort of, because for us, we've been approached to write a book a couple of times, but actually neither of us have done it. So it's sort of like it would be nice to have somebody who holds our hand through the process. So have they authored before, and you were tagging along with them and contributing, or were you all newies to this?
yeah, well, funny you say that. Sean had, and he very much led the project. And we were a collection of co-authors, and he reached out to us and said, I tell you what, you're all busy school leader. I mean, I was a head teacher at the time,
Right.
and we just come out of the pandemic. So the idea of writing something, I thought, do you know what, I'm really not sure. I love writing, and I,
Yes.
doing lots of guest lecturing, etc. But I'm really not sure about this. Work running a school feels like a full-time job and some, doesn't it? And I was working in an area of high deprivation. We were in the inspection window. So part of me was thinking, really? Um, but Sean was fantastic at genuinely making it a collegiate approach. And he absolutely held our hand through the process. And it was lovely because it felt very collegiate. Again, it felt a lot more manageable. And as I say, we all did a chapter each. That was with Bloomsbury. But interestingly, then, as you say, having someone hold my hand through the process when it was all over, I thought, I kind of missed that. And so my second book, which is out in April, was more of a solo project. And that probably did give me the confidence to go, yeah, I'll kind of have a bit of a bash of this now. I will say it is very different doing it by yourself.
Oh yeah, okay.
But
What's the title of the book?
so the title is Empowering Teachers, Improving Schools, and it's kind of based on this, my latest obsession, which is really this idea that psychological safety is the precursor or the foundation for creating a sense of belonging. And actually, what the evidence based on the research tells us is that across industries, the highest performing industries are rooted in this culture of psychological safety.
Mm.
And I suppose I'm really interested in this idea that as educators, I think we champion accountability. I don't think we shy away from it, actually. I think sometimes there's a bit of myth busting to do around this idea that leaders are somehow afraid of accountability. But I think accountability in the absence of psychological safety,
Yeah.
if we're not careful, can
I,
actually stifle innovation, limit progress, and actually encourage exclusionary practice or even poor leadership behaviours.
yeah.
And I know I've heard you and both Stan talk a lot about how the impact of that across the sector more widely. So I'm interested in that because I think actually, unfortunately, other industries are further ahead than us when
Yeah.
it comes to that kind of thinking, even the private sector. And even though we are charged with developing or 21st century learners, we aren't necessarily cultivating cultures of psychological safety for our young people always.
Yeah, no, I agree. I
Unpopular
mean,
view.
it's actually in business, that you're looking most successful businesses are looking for the next big thing. They're looking to just eke out a little bit more improvement. But actually, innovation is. I think the accountability framework sometimes expects you to be successful in innovating all the time. So you're not allowed to fail on innovation. Well, in business, you know that some of your innovations are going to fail. It's sort of like built into the system. Not every idea is going to work, Stan?
I was just going to think Google did the work that I think led to the psychological safety aspect because they were trying to find what were the most effective teams, and every mix they made really didn't, we'll put all people who've got the same ideas together. We'll put people with different ideas together. And they did hundreds of teams. And the thing that made it was psychological safety and everybody around the table contributing to the meeting, which you can only do if it's psychologically safe. But it struck me, I know when I was reading, I think it was your email, Laura, to say, I'm interested in, and it just struck me for the first time, the one place you are never psychologically safe is online.
Mm. Yes.
It really is. If you think of it like, if I say something in a meeting and everybody thinks it's daft, but we've agreed a psychological safety, I won't get called out. I won't. But online, wow.
Well, that actually leads, because we normally go to Stan, but that's a good lead in, isn't it, to the point that you're going to make today in terms of what's caught your eye. So would you mind, Stan, if we pick
No,
that
not
up?
at all.
Laura, what's caught your eye? Because it leads from what Stan just said, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I was really interested in the government's new violence against women and girls strategy, which is in theory designed to better protect children from misogyny and abuse. So the idea is that it's going to focus on healthy relationships and consent, and it's designed to tackle abuse through the strategy, but also specifically through a new helpline. So they want to tackle the most worrying attitudes as early as possible, but they're also focusing on this idea that high risk individuals will get extra care and extra support that they need. When they published the strategy, I think, like a lot of policy initiatives, it was poorly timed potentially because they published it on the 18th of December, where, of course, lots of schools are
Yeah.
just breaking up for Christmas. So hopefully lots of school leaders will have started to engage with that at the start of the spring term. There was some thoughtful aspects to the way in which it was published. For example, I think they really contextualized it and brought it to life because they included testimonials from real families, real individuals whose lives have been touched by this agenda. So I thought that was particularly thoughtful. What did catch me off guard a little bit was this idea that as soon as the strategy landed, there was this really polarized discourse, both in the media, or perhaps amplified by the media, I'd suggest, but also, unfortunately, in certain factions of the education sector as well. And there was this discourse around the idea that actually, if we're supporting or advocating for women and girls, and thinking about how we better protect children, and let's not forget their children, we're talking about here, children from misogyny and abuse, that this is somehow an anti-boys or anti-men agenda. And I thought, on a human level, how sad is that? You know, the idea that we're somehow pitting boys against girls or vice versa. Because actually, what got missed in a lot of that debate was the evidence base, and the research shows that boys, of course, experience or self-report better mental health and better life outcomes if they are steered away from harmful content, and to your earlier point, Stan, harmful content online, because lots of this, of course, refers to the manosphere. So that was the thing that caught my eye, and I thought it's the polarization of that debate is difficult because, you know, there's so much potential benefit to this strategy when executed well, but it's not without its challenges already for school leaders.
Yeah, I mean, I have a thing at the moment, well, for the last 2 years, about the political state of how everything has to be polarized. I mean, there's nothing, if you looked at it objectively, there's nothing funnier than the issue with Grok at the moment, where free speech, sort of, people are saying, you know, we can't ban it, we can't do anything. Don't say, hang on, this is doing something that's really not nice. And the very thing you say you're supporting, children and women, this is damaging. But I can't, from my standpoint, criticize that. So you've got MPs saying things like, you know, well, it's only a few people who do those kind of things on the, not that this particular program isn't protecting like it should do, and therefore breaking the law. That's irrelevant because we need free speech, and it happens to be something that supports us in our political stance. I think we talked nearly 3 years ago, probably, Frank, and I used the phrase shades of grey, saying there are now no shades of grey in the way we communicate. Any new aspect has to be, you're either with us or against us. There's no midpoint. And
it's interesting the the approach. This is, I don't know where I'm going with this, but you know, there's this suggestion that all under 16 should be banned from using mobile phones, you know, or have social media. And I think to myself, well, actually, that cat's out of the bag, really, isn't it? You know, in a way, you know, I mean, they've all got phones, haven't they? I mean, I do think it's crazy giving very young children phones, but actually, what are schools doing other than banning to help young people understand the world of social media? You know, and I was really heartened recently when our 11-year-old granddaughter, we were over Christmas, said, "Oh, that's fake news, that." And I said, "Well, how do you know that?" And so she said, "Well, it was that, and it was that, and that." And I thought, well done, Hattie. Well done. You know, where did you get that from? Didn't get it from school. Got it from her parent. You know, and you think, well, we can't rely on every parent. You know, we do need to have a school system that prepares young people for now and the future. You know, and actually, you know, it's pretty criminal what's going on around preparing young people for a world living and engaging online. You know, and I think that, you know, it just is. I'm old enough to remember something called media studies. It still goes on. You know, it's still a subject, but it was criticised so heavily by a particular government. You know, it became very polarised. You know, oh, it's a Mickey Mouse Disney sort of program. You know, there's no real academic element to it, and you think, what? Where? You know, what? If ever there was a subject that every child needed to be engaged in, is media studies. You know, and the impact of language and the introduction of, you know, various other algorithms. Well, there's loads. It's a cross-curricular subject, isn't it? It's not just about media. You know, so I think, that we really do need to look at ourselves as well as educationalists to say, well, we can't just say, let's ban it, let's ban everything. I do think with Stan, what you were saying about Grok, we've come off X in publicising this it's absolutely wrong. But I do think that the polarisation has meant that we've harmed children, and actually stopped them from being given the skills and the knowledge to actually embrace the world as it is and in the future.
Well, did you see the
Off
solution?
my little box there now. It's over to you lot.
Did you
I
see the
feel better.
solution for Grok, which is, oh yeah, but now only paid, only people who pay can use that.
I know, so you're paying for this now, so only elite members can do it.
Yeah.
It's
Funny, I was just going to add to that you've already highlighted the contradictory stance there of our political elite to be able to say we brought out this great Vorg strategy, and as I said, there's lots of positives there, potential to have huge impact, but at the same time, we've seen this explosion in Grok, and again, the one of the proposed solution was, well, don't worry, we're going to limit the users by monetizing it. And let's be clear, as you say, we've had lots of politicians quick to denounce it and vocalize their outrage, and yet so slow to act, quick to vocalize what Ofcom could and might and should do. But let's be real, there's so much money and power and influence behind all of these apps and software that actually there's a lack of political will to actually act meaningfully. And then it was so interesting, Frank, hearing you talk about media studies as an example, because in successive waves, we've seen other examples, haven't we? Like when coding first came out, how quickly that filtered down to the curriculum agenda as, if you want to be employed in the 21st century, everybody must be coding.
I know.
And I remember the panic as a head teacher being like, quick, what year groups are being taught coding? And then how quickly that became, well, that's obsolete now. And I think sometimes we're so quick to jump in that bandwagon instead of, as you point out, with that lovely example of, was it your niece, did you say?
Our granddaughter, yeah.
Instead of those lifelong soft skills that get a bad rap, but actually critical thinking. I mean, how empowering is that now for both young people, but as they move into the workforce, irrespective of what industry you're in? And then lastly, just to add, you spoke about the skill set we need to develop in young people. And I just wonder if sometimes the success or potential lack of success around this new Vorg strategy will lie so heavily on our ability to upskill the leaders and teachers supposed to be delivering it, right? Because I do understand that we might have well-intended practitioners wanting to deliver it well, but their own lack of subject knowledge around this, their own fear of upsetting the community, might mean that whilst they want to be an ally, they shy away from what are both difficult but important topics. And then also their own trauma. If you are a female who has been affected by some of these issues, your personal experiences, again, coming back to that idea of psychological safety, really empowering our staff and community to make sure school is a safe place to speak up, share concerns, ask questions, whether you're a parent, a teacher, or a pupil, and meeting people where they're at on their journey so that they can be seen and heard and supported. Because, of course, all of these things are achievable. But again, when we feel that pressure and that sense of accountability in a way that's not helpful, actually, I think it stops us from doing the meaningful work, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree. Actually, it's hearing you talk. It's impressive, isn't it, Stan?
Yeah.
Well, I love my soapbox now as well.
No. Yeah. Okay, Stan. What's caught your eye then this week?
Well, we're still on technology.
We're online, aren't we? I think with this one.
It was a contrast between two doctor surgeries. I said we're well into the National Health Service at the moment. I had a few issues, which the example I want to give is I rang my doctor on the Monday, 8:30, got an appointment for 10 o'clock that day. And when I needed an investigation in hospital, I got an appointment sent to me the same day for the following Friday, 4 days later. And everything was done by phone, by talking, by text. My mother-in-law last week collapsed while she was shopping in Tesco. She's 91. It turns out she hasn't seen the doctor for best part of 2 years, even though she's on blood pressure tablets. So nobody's been monitoring her blood pressure. And so my wife said, we'll make her appointment with the doctor. So my wife rang rather than my mother-in-law. And the receptionist said, no, you need to fill in a triage form. And then a clinician, not necessarily a doctor, a clinician will read that and decide whether you need an appointment or not. And so just said, so should I come and pick the form up then? No, it's electronic. And I've already sent it to your mother's phone. Now, with the best will in the world, my 91-year-old mother-in-law is not going to fill a form in online on her phone, and she doesn't have any kind of IT equipment at home. She has the internet simply because she can watch rugby on TV with it. That's it. And I just thought there's not been enough thought in that process to say there will be people who cannot access the doctor's surgery that way.
Yeah.
There might not be many, and it might be fewer year on year, but for now that there are significant. I mean, my mother passed away recently. She wouldn't have been able to respond to that, and I just wonder if that stops people then seeing or seeking an appointment at the doctor's because I can't access it.
Yeah.
And ringing up makes no difference because I'm just told I have to fill the form in. The form becomes the barrier to getting some treatment.
Yeah, and a woman, we had a colleague called Bina Puri came on here, didn't she, about a year ago. Bina works for Greater Manchester authorities looking at the impact of digital disadvantage. And so she raised the issue, didn't she, of more elderly citizens who don't feel connected in the digital world, and actually some of that is they do want to get connected, but they don't know how to. They can't afford the equipment to make them digitally connected, and actually it does take me back to a really sort of difficult time for the Labour Party. But I remember when Jeremy Corbyn was going for during a general election, and part of their manifesto was to ensure that all families had broadband connectivity. And actually, you think, well, hang on a minute, that it's funny how sort of in and it's about polarization in all of these parties and all of these ideas. You might not agree with the general thrust of it, but actually there might be a little bit of a nugget in there. And I think for me, it's this polarization is coming back to it again. That in effect, this idea that people expect you to be this. There's this is your citizen. They've all got the phones. They've all got perhaps a laptop or something that they can use, which is far from the truth.
But how many governments, Frank, have suggested, and it's never happened, that instead of having education and health as a political thing, we actually run it as a joint cross-party.
Yeah. Well,
and I know several governments say, well, we'll do that, and then it never happens because you could have a long-term strategy that was actually longer than 5 years. Imagine a 10-year plan for education.
But without that, the SEND initiatives are going to founder, aren't they?
Yeah.
Unless there's a clear clarity around funding for that. And I remember working for the Northern Powers Partnership, Lord Jim O'Neill, who was the chair, and he was Treasury Minister in Cameron, but also in another government. He said the most protective government department in his time in government was the DfE. So both in terms, and we can feel it, can't you? You can feel that control being held centrally over most matters. Whether that's control over the curriculum, control over funding, control over support for bailing out local authorities for SEND provision and this sort of stuff. It's all as if everything, there's a lot of noise about, well, we want to have, local control. But like Andy Burnham in Manchester is creating what's called the MBAC. Well, he's found that, two very clear different pathways. This leads into my point. Um, but actually, the government's not backed it. This is a genuine bit of innovation that actually can't just happen in Manchester because of all the other local authorities nearby who border onto the Greater Manchester authorities. So this needs government. This is how you connect people together. The DfE are clearly not keen on it.
It's
And
really
that,
interesting. Sorry,
go on,
Frank.
go on.
It's really interesting hearing you talk about that level of connectivity and the way in which government can protect and collaborate in a collegiate way, and when they don't, how things can so quickly fall apart. I'm a huge West Wing fan, so I have this sort of rose-tinted spectacle idea of bipartisanship um, and how the future could and might be. But interestingly, I was at the Include Ed conference at the weekend, which was a fantastic event. But Tom Rees was there
Right.
presenting. And of course, he's advising the government on the send and inclusion work and chairing that panel. And he made lovely reference to this idea that, ideally change happens from the top down. But he also referenced this idea that change doesn't have to happen that way. Change can also happen in a very grassroots, collective way
Yes.
from the bottom up. And then we heard from some fantastic young people speaking on a panel. But it wasn't until I left that the cynic in me thought, is he trying to send us a coded message there? Is it going to be us doing the work after all?
Well, I think the thing for me, Stan and I are old enough to be head teachers during a period when the national literacy strategy was introduced, the national numeracy strategies were introduced, and actually what that did was it was saying it was clear the decks. None of you know what you're doing. We're going to tell you how to do it. And what happened there is you ended up with successful schools being forced to use an approach which was not as effective as the one that they were currently using. And that's
Unless you
the
said
real.
no,
Sorry.
unless you said no,
Yeah, well, Stan said no,
we're
but
not doing it.
then there was all these threats. It goes back to the account. There were threats. Well, we'll send Ofsted in. The local authority will be all over you. And actually that is the real risk here of government-driven, centrally driven initiatives that actually ignore what is currently happening in some very good practice, and people are then forced to do things, or they ignore it.
No, there's still this concept of, there's a way of educating children that we should all be able to do in the same way in
Yeah.
every school, and it will be successful with every child. We've been in education nearly 200 years now. We haven't found it yet. I suggest it might not exist.
Well, actually, we have a guest coming back, Paul Ainsworth, in a couple of weeks, and he's written. Yeah,
I love you,
Paul.
Paul.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so there are no silver bullets, and that's the book, and there's no silver bullets too, I think, or even three coming. But actually, that's absolutely right. I think that's the one thing I've learned. Yeah. Anyway, we're running out of time, so let me just do my one. And in a way it links into this quite nicely about sort of central control. The government this week announced a major investment over a long period of time. It looks as though it will happen about improving rail connections in the north. Now, if you don't live in the north, then I just want to tell you that despite significant improvements more recently on the line that runs from Manchester to Leeds, TransPennine Express, who runs that franchise, it isn't an express journey. I just want to make that clear. So there are many times when you're traveling at around or less than 30 miles an hour. And there have been improvements, but it's still heavily overcrowded. And anybody traveling from, to get from Manchester to Sheffield is very, very difficult, both incredibly difficult by car during the winter, but also very, very old stock and very, very slow journey, from Manchester to Sheffield. So this is a big thing. And what concerns me a little bit is I hope there's going to be some connection now about engagement with schools and colleges in order to prepare for some of the career opportunities that are going to arise out of this work. So there's, major infrastructure, HS2, level. And actually what would really frustrate me is if what happened was we ended up with people from outside of those communities coming into those careers, but actually just rehousing themselves from a different part of the country in some of the, the upmarket flats that have grown up in Manchester over the last 10, 15 years. That would be an absolutely missed opportunity. So, I hope that government is thinking about connecting all of that. It's not just about the announcement on the infrastructure, it's the spin-offs that come from that need to be done now in order to make sure that everybody benefits. And it's, we don't just end up with a better train line. That in itself would be good, but it would be a quarter of the opportunity that exists. So that's me finished.
That train, Frank, to put it in perspective, the train that you get to Sheffield is the Liverpool to Norwich train.
Yes.
It's about 4 carriages long with no buffet car. So if you go from Liverpool to Norwich, you might as well take a tent and a gas stove.
Honestly, Stein, if Kent commuters or Essex commuters had to endure that, there would be an outcry. There really would, And I've done those journeys from Essex, and yeah. Yeah, I remember. Let me get into anecdotal stuff, but yeah, then we really need to, take the opportunity to make sure that those chances are for the younger people in the north.
We could do a whole podcast just.
Sorry, go on, Laura.
I was going to say we could do a whole podcast just about that particular train, why couldn't we?
We could. Actually, I'd love it. I mean, I find it funny that Reform are opposing all of this investment, when in fact, I bet not one of them has been on one of those train journeys. If they'd endured that from Leeds to Manchester, I mean, just getting through Staley Bridge, everybody gets on at Staley Bridge and Huddersfield. It's just horrible. These are 2 stations where everybody seems to be coming on. But anyway.
I was just going to say, Frank, did you see the regulator had tried to rule out a train that was going from Manchester to London gets into London at 9 o'clock, because there's a risk sometimes of overcrowding, and that train, it's the most popular train between Manchester and London. It's the one that makes the whoever runs the system the most money. And it would have to run anyway because it has to get to London for
in order to come back.
Yeah. So the plan was that it would run empty from Manchester to London, and they wouldn't allow it to be on the timetable or anything, so that people couldn't use it. I mean, I understand they've pulled back from that now.
They have, yeah.
What's in somebody's brain when they think that's a good idea?
Go on, Laura, let you finish off.
I was just going to say, well, I don't live in the north, obviously, although I will say I'm married to a northerner, so he likes to remind me with quite some regularity.
Good on him. I've never met him, but I like him already.
Does he keep a whippet and a flat hat? Does he?
Listen, he loved listening to, when I had Paul Ainsworth's podcast on with when he was talking to both of you, he was in his element hearing how many Man U references there were, because he's a big Man U fan. So yeah, he was really enjoying that. So he's probably a bigger fan of the podcast than I am. But it was just interesting listening to you connect it to the education sector there, because what I would say as a Londoner is we have unfortunately fallen foul of the impact of when that kind of local place planning and planning around transport improvements has been really poorly thought through, and the impact in terms of regeneration within the community, and how local community members then have been displaced as a result, and the impact on things like falling school roles, etc., and how devastating that's been for communities and head teachers. So I think there's something interesting there about policy making versus what needs to happen on the ground for communities, and the financial exclusion that happens, and the impact on education, versus, when it's done well, and what local community collaboration can look like. I'm thinking about trusts like Tees Valley Education Trust, who are real champions of place-based support.
Yes.
And they're great at collaborating with local industry. And I think that's sometimes misrepresented as raising aspirations for children. She speaks to those families, they'll say, don't talk to me about raising aspirations, talk to me about opportunity.
Yeah,
I've got plenty of aspirations for my child, thank you. And so they're great examples of educators that when there are opportunities for regeneration, quote unquote, they'll reach out to local industry and capitalise on that. So I think there's plenty of scope for it to be positive, but as you say, unfortunately, it's really contingent on the policymakers and how that's enacted on the ground. So best of luck with it in your area, folks.
Right. Well, that's about 35 minutes. I think it's yeah, it's about 35. So, Laura, we'd love to have you back when that book's published. We do a series called Spotlight where we just talk about one issue. So we'd love to have you back. I'll arrange that
Love
either
that.
in the
Thank
next
you.
day or so. But you've been a great guest. Thank you so much for your time this morning. And
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Laura.
Stan, we roll on to our 250th. I think we actually thought it might be Paul Ainsworth who was going to be our 250th guest, but I think he might be missing it by one. So anyway, we'll see. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone. We look forward to
Thank you so much.
you joining us again next week for the next Frank and Stan chat. So until then, bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.